What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining the Glad's Horror Channel, the best horror channel here on YouTube. And today we've got a brand new episode of the history of horror. Let's do me a favor here. Let's get this to 20 likes so I know that you guys are liking this and I'll continue to make them. Let's get going. By the 1950s, horror had become stale. For roughly 40 years prior, we saw the same pattern for almost all horror movies. The settings were often in dark castles with heavy fog, and the horror fan was beginning to grow tired of that and was clamoring for something different, clamoring for a change. We got that change in a huge way in 1951 with The Thing from Another World. The Thing from Another World ushered in a new horror subgenre called horror sci-fi. This is the single most influential horror movie of the 1950s because for at least 5 years after its release, almost every horror movie featured aliens, monsters, and radioactive giants, subjects that were put forth in The Thing from Another World. The horror production juggernaut Universal Pictures also extended the Universal movie monster group when they entered the horror sci-fi subgenre as well with The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Other countries caught wind of the way horror was changing. In 1954, Japan released arguably the most popular sci-fi horror movie of all time when they released Godzilla, a radioactive fire-breathing monster that destroyed anything in its path. The impact of Godzilla is still being felt today, with a new entry in the long-standing saga released just about 2 years ago. Now, as influential as The Thing from Another World was for being the first of the subgenre, in 1956, Invasion of the Body Snatchers was released. This was huge because back then, like I said previously, the tropes in the horror were all the same. So when you had Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it took a level of real fear to people because in the previous movies, if you weren't in that space, you weren't affected. Right? If you weren't in those dark castles, you weren't affected. With the Invasion of the Body Snatchers and the fact that the Body Snatchers could be anybody you know, it made a much more visceral, much more real, deep fear for people. That movie was huge, and I would say that movie had the greatest impact at its time on the alien horror trope. Because of the success of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, this subgenre had taken full hold, and we would see this for years to come. In 1958, there was the Blob and the Fly that were released, and both of those were huge mainstays in the horror industry. Now, by this time, some of the previous mainstays of horror, such as Bela Lugosi, Lon Chaney Jr., Boris Karloff, they'd all started to be aging, and they were kind of fading away from the spotlight a little bit. But Bela Lugosi attempted to remain in the forefront by going into the horror sci-fi genre with The Bride of the Monster and Plan 9 from Outer Space. Both of these were low-budget horror movies. They didn't go nearly as far as they anticipated, but it was still a decent entry into that subgenre. And also pretty much put the exclamation point on how important that was. When you had production companies like Universal that had been destroying the game for so many years with their own brand of horror, now transitioning over to that subgenre, it shows just how important that subgenre was and just how much the fans were looking for that. Now, just because the subgenre came to life in the 1950s, that doesn't mean that was the only thing, the only big horror movement going on in the 1950s. This concludes our look into the horror sci-fi genre of the 1950s. Join me next time when I go into Vincent Price and talk about his impact on the horror genre. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.